Hello friends, I am back. This is my second book video. I'm very excited about it. I put on this shirt today with my little book ghost and I said I should make a video. I'm actually really excited about this project, so thank you to all of you who are actually going to watch this and new subscribers that I've gotten from my YouTube channel. I really appreciate you. It's just a thing I just suddenly decided to do, and I'm really jazzed about it. Like, I've been thinking about, oh, I should do a video about this, a video about that. So upcoming, I will have some things planned. Like, the books on that little library cart there are actually very specific, and I'm going to show you what's on there and why in a video. And I'm going to talk about all kinds of things, and I might do tours of the office and all that kind of jazz. But right now, I just thought I am going to do a video about some books that will help you get to know me, like the books that shaped the Jessica you know today. And I actually started out going like, because I think it's a thing I've seen, but it's probably like a book talk, like very short. It's like 5 books to get to know me. So I started to gather up 5 books, and then I'm like, okay, so 10 books to get to know me. And now here I am sitting in a giant pile you can't see. It's going to be 15 books to get to know me. So I'm going to try and be very short about it, because as promised, my videos, I do not want to be very long. The last one, because I was introducing myself a little bit, last one was 26 minutes long, and I apologize. That was the upper limit of what I would watch for sure. So I won't do that to you again. But first off, before we get started, what am I reading right now? I am listening to the audiobook of Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell and reading Made in America by Bill Bryson, which is a history of the English language as it developed in America. It is fascinating. It's funny. If you know Bill Bryson, you know it's both of those things. And I just started last night reading aloud to the family. We are reading aloud now Silver on the Tree, the last book in the Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper. So that's what we're doing. But now, the books that shaped me. And let's get started with a picture book, even though I came to it later than about half of these. When I graduated from high school in Rexburg, Idaho, just down the road where we did all our shopping at the time in Idaho Falls, there was a very darling little bookstore called the Paper Bag Princess. Yes, named after the Robert Munsch picture book, which is so precious. And right before high school graduation, my mom went in there to get something for me for graduation. And the owner called her over. She's like, oh, I've been hoping you would come. I have something. You have to get it for your daughter. And she showed my mom this, The Library by Sarah Stewart, and illustrated by David Small. And she's like, I just looked at this book and thought, oh my gosh, it's that woman's daughter. It's her daughter. And if you don't know, it's about Elizabeth Brown, a little girl who grows into a woman who just prefers to read, and she has curly red hair, and she wears glasses. I wear contacts now, but at the time I always wore glasses. So it's about a little girl who would rather stay inside in the shade in the summers and read, and her house just fills up and fills up and fills up with books. And it's me. It's the story of my life. I'm very much looking forward to the final stages of my life as they've been laid out in this book. Fabulous. The Library by Sarah Stewart and David Small. Just wonderful. All right. I'm just going to grab whatever's at hand so I don't have anything fall on me. But so these are no particular order. But The Hero in the Crown and The Blue Sword. If these are not my prettiest editions, but these are the ones dear to my heart because they are the first editions of these I ever owned. I now have nicer, fancier covers. But of course, the nicer, fancier covers are not signed to Jessica with the Erin-colored hair and autographed by Robin McKinley. If you've ever heard me talk about how I got started on writing, when I was 11 years old and in 5th grade, I discovered the book The Hero and the Crown, about a redheaded, again, a theme with me, a redheaded princess who goes out to slay dragons and has 2 hot guys fall in love with her, and her horse doesn't die, and it's wonderful and magical, and it's what made me realize that writing was a job you could have, and that it was the job that I wanted, and absolutely changed everything about how I read. It put me on my path to becoming a writer, and I almost felt like guilty because I actually loved The Blue Sword even more than when I read it because of her bond with her horse and the the way they live in the desert was just so cool, and their clothes were so fascinating, and I wanted to have clothes like that and stuff. And so these count as one book. Yes, they do. But this is the obsession that put me onto becoming a writer. Right there. Dracula. And of course I had to have my fanciest, prettiest edition with the bats on the side, illustrated by Edward Gorey. So two things I love in one. Absolutely love Edward Gorey's illustrations, and I love the story of Dracula. If you have not read Dracula, it is a fabulous novel. It's an epistolary novel. It's entirely told through newspaper articles, letters, journal entries, and is just fantastic. I was so obsessed with it. This is one of numerous copies I own. This is just my prettiest one. I have pop-up books, picture books, Mickey Mouse as Jonathan Harker in a little golden book. I have it all. But in this edition, and in all the good unabridged editions, I was so obsessed with the story after I first read it in high school that if you didn't know, I wrote a book that's sort of my fan homage to Dracula, and it's called Silver in the Blood. And someone actually mentions the book Dracula in Silver in the Blood, and it ended up my husband and I traveling around Romania with a copy of this in one hand and a copy of The Search for Dracula by Ionescu in the other hand, while I put together research for this and staying in hotel rooms and castles where supposedly Dracula had stayed, and eating in a restaurant in his mom's house, and like the whole shebang. So Dracula, if you haven't read it, you must. If you have read it, get the Edward Gorey edition and read it again. It's fabulous. Okay. Many years ago, and this surprises quite a few people, but before Harry Potter, so whether or not you like or care anything about Harry Potter, but before Harry Potter, there was actually kind of not a lot of fantasy books for kids that were being published or staying in print, unless they were classics like The Hobbit or The Wizard of Oz. And so I had read a book called Dog's Body by Diana Wynne Jones, and a book called Archer's Goon and Howl's Moving Castle. I had read those three books in Pocatello as a kid by Diana Wynne Jones, and I loved them so much, and I always told my husband how much I especially loved the book Dog's Body and how much it meant to me. And I had literally worn out the copy when we moved to Rexburg in their library there. I checked it out so many times, and it was so old that they actually, one time after I turned it in, the next time I went to check it out, I'm like, where is it? Is somebody else check it out? Can I put it on hold? And they're like, no, it's gone. Like the cover was falling off, so we threw it away. And I cried. So before Amazon, before any of that, when I first got married, my husband literally had to call a bookstore. Actually, I think he may have emailed them. It was the early days of email. But he emailed a bookstore in England and asked them for a copy of Dog's Body by Diana Wynne Jones, because being a British author, she was, of course, and she's very popular there still, and she was at the time, and they said, we only have a paperback, and the shipping is not going to be worth it. So he said, well, do you have this and this? And he got me one Valentine's Day. I got Dog's Body, Archer's Goon, and A Tale of Time City. Three of, I think, her best books. But Dog's Body, I have always maintained everyone should read. It is the greatest love story of all time. And I will say no more about it, but Dog's Body by Diana Wynne Jones, which of course, then I had to tell him that really one of my other favorites was Howl's Moving Castle. And so eventually, for Yola Bukaflor, which I'll talk about as we get closer to Christmas and the time for the book flood. But he got me the beautiful folio illustrated edition of Howl's Moving Castle a few years ago, because it has always been one of my favorites. Just such a gorgeous book. And the way she plays with the expectations of a fantasy book in that, where the oldest sister will do this, and the middle sister will do that, and the youngest sister will seek her fortune, and all those things, is just so fantastic. If you're paying attention in Howl's Moving Castle, so much goes on in that book that is sort of parodying classic fairy tales, as well as sort of like mocking modern conventions and things like that, and stories. Just Diana Wynne Jones is the best. And then, of course, the redhead theme, it continues apace. We have Anne of Green Gables, the ultimate spunky redheaded heroine. This is a beautiful new painted cover edition that I just picked up beautifully from Poppy Books in Spanish Fork, Utah. Isn't it gorgeous? But of course I have the whole set in paperback. I have the Baby Lit board book. I have the graphic novel adaptation. But if you haven't read Anne of Green Gables, it's just a wonderful story about a girl who's just very much herself and always is. If you don't know what the big deal is about, she's very much sort of an empowered heroine from the really time period. She was not like other girls before that was a thing that you like sought to have. Just a very literary and like obsessed with literature and books type of girl. So she very much appeals to that type of girl as well, who's literary and obsessed with books and poems and things like that. And I love her. I love Anne. Dune. Dune by Frank Herbert. I read it when I was 11 years old. Way too young, but still. I read it when I was 11 years old. And we had just moved to a new town and I was not on board with it. And I will be honest, it was very over dramatic of me, but I had the Litany Against Fear memorized and I used to say it to myself all the time when I was walking around the halls of school. And I was bullied and I was picked on and things like that. And it really did help to have that, honestly. And just, I loved the story so much and I was obsessed with Paul Atreides. Who wasn't? I was in love with him. And look at this gorgeous Folio Society edition. Again, another fabulous present from my husband, who knows what I like and where to get it for me. And Dune, my Frank Herbert, just rocked my world. Like, I'm far more into Dune than Star Wars, and I do love Star Wars, so. I had heard about in high school and asked my mom for the first book in this series I'd been hearing about by Tad Williams, called The Dragonbone Chair, and my mom went to get him for me for my one birthday. I think I was a senior in high school or something, and when she saw the covers of the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy, she was obsessed too, because she wanted to know what happens to this boy, and a redhead, of course. Like, she's like, wait, in the second one, he's like got this white streak in his hair, and then in like the third one, he's like old and has a beard and a white streak in his hair, and like, who is that girl, and who are these weird looking people on the cover of this one? So my mom got me the entire set and asked me to read them and figure out and just tell her basically what happens to that kid on the cover and what he goes through. And I promptly did, because they were and are like, this is one of the best fantasy worlds I have ever traveled to. I love it. I love the new books that Tad Williams is writing in this series. They're just fabulous. He's created such a fabulous world and such interesting mythology, and the characters are, you do become obsessed. You do need to know what's going to happen to Simon and what is going on in these books. And I was in love. And despite the fact that each one of these books is about 1,000 pages long, I have read them and reread them multiple times. I have written research papers on them, like done deep dives into the meanings of the symbolism of the religions and things like that in these books. Fabulous. Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart is when I became obsessed with the Arthurian legend, specifically with Merlin, however. And this is my new Hodder and Company from Britain cover, because the cover that I found, the book that I found, was from my mom's book club in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was a cover that featured Merlin wearing pretty much nothing but a flowy blue cloak with moons and stars on it, bare-chested with long flowy black hair, looking like a romance novel heroine there on that book. I would love to find another copy of that edition, because that's why I picked it up and that's what I was obsessed with. Absolutely fell in love with the young Merlin, and sort of started me on my path to like all things, like I love all things Arthur, and I have been working for, I'm gonna say 30 years now, I'll just put it there, on my own sort of take on the Arthur legend, and it's just still not ready. I'm always tinkering. I'm always like, what if I did it this way? What if I did it that? And it actually started out my version as a sequel to Camelot, the musical, which I'm also obsessed with because of this. Then when I found out there was a musical and all the things and the Disney movie and everything, I just became super obsessed with King Arthur. But it all started with The Crystal Cave and Mary Stuart, and I love all of her Arthur books. If you don't know them, absolutely get them, but always start with The Crystal Cave and Merlin. I even keep little Wart from the Sword in the Stone Funko Pops and Madam Mim and stuff here on my desk. And I think Merlin's fallen behind the desk, so I won't dive and dig for him. But Guy Gavriel Kay, fantastic author. Sort of like an author's author, if you will, of fantasy books. They're not hardcore fantasy. They're not like Game of Thronesy fantasy with lots of weird magic and stuff like that. They're just gorgeously written books, always sort of loosely based on a historical period in our time. And these in particular, this is technically one big book split into two. But I love the main character of Crispin, who is in these books. It's called the Sarantine Mosaic. First one is Sailing to Sarantium. Second one is Lord of Emperors. I became obsessed with them. When I first started reading his books, Song for Arbonne, I think, is the first one I read, and then the Fiona of Our Tapestry. But when I first read these, I couldn't think about anything else for a long time. I couldn't read anything else for a long time. I just kept flipping back through and picking out things here and there. And sometimes, and I told him this when I first met him, and he still teases me about it. He's just a sweet guy, but I didn't mean that to sound sarcastic. He really is a very sweet man. But anyway, I told him that sometimes when I need like a little cathartic cry or something like that, or I'm feeling kind of moody, I will read the last chapter of Lord of Emperors because it will give you like a good little sort of bittersweet type of cry. And he was just staring at me as I'm telling him this, and he's like, "It makes you cry, so you read it again?" And I'm like, "Yes, it's good. That's good." But he didn't believe me, but it is good. It's fabulous. All right. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, who also wrote the 101 Dalmatians. But she wrote this fantastic book, and this is my British edition. It's the prettier one, so I brought this one downstairs. But I Capture the Castle, the story of two sisters. It's this whole family living in literally the crumbling ruins of a castle in the 1930s. The dad is a writer who's only ever written one thing, and he became so famous for it, he's had writer's block ever since. And just sort of what happens to them when the castle comes under new ownership and they don't pay rent because the previous owner was such a fan of the dad's books, and just everything that happens to this family, and especially this girl just sort of growing up. She's just finished school, and it's like, what will she do next with herself? I love it so much. That was a dumb explanation of it, but I can't tell you. And some people hate it because the ending is not like a super happy-go-lucky, happily ever after. It's very different. It's not sad, but some people kind of hate the ending when they read it on my recommendation, and I don't care. I think the ending is perfection. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. He has a wife in the attic. I do not care. So freaking romantic. Not dog's body romantic, but definitely very romantic. I understand why his wife is in the attic, and I support him in that. And he loves Jane, and Jane loves him, and that is okay with me. I might have to do a thing about sort of like retellings as well, because there's a modern update to Jane Eyre. Well, there's a couple of them. I could do a whole video just on that, but there's one in particular that is absolutely one of my favorite contemporary young adult books. A Christmas Carol. If you know me, you know I love Christmas. It is an obsession. And A Christmas Carol, though, is in my top 10 of all time books, probably in my top 5 of all time books. I read it aloud to my kids every year and still cannot make it through many of the scenes because I am just, everything about this book is so gorgeous and moving to me. And the descriptions of the descriptions of the food at the grocery store with the ghost of Christmas Present walking through the streets, the descriptions of the snow sliding off the roofs is so glorious to me. This is some of the best English language writing that has ever been, and I will die on that hill. Mr. Wilmer. If you've ever seen me talk about kids' books, you know how much I love this. Mr. Wilmer by Robert Lawson. Robert Lawson wrote Rabbit Hill. He did Make Way for Ducklings. He is known for all this other stuff. This is his best book. It's been out of print for years, and I know why. It's because it's about a 29-year-old man who on his 29th birthday discovers that he can now talk to animals. It is a children's book about a 29-year-old man. It's one of the best, cutest, funniest, most delightful books I have ever read, and every couple of years I read it to my kids and we love it all over again. And he is in love with the beautiful red-headed Miss Sweeney. Oh, Miss Sweeney. It's a wonderful book. Pooh Pooh and the Dragons, another surprise author, C.S. Forster, the guy who wrote all those nautical British tales of Horatio Hornblower going to sea, also wrote a book for his son. It was apparently bribery. When his wife was away, his son refused to eat dinner. He told him he would tell him part of a story for every time he ate dinner without whining. And the result was this book about a young boy with a very clever father, and clearly based on someone we know, who discovers and basically has 2 dragons and then a baby dragon living in their yard and their adventures with their dragon friends. It is delightful. It is illustrated by our friend Robert Lawson. I don't know why this one fell out of print because this is so great, and the Hornblower books are all still there, and there's TV series and all that stuff, and why not crack open this too? It's fabulous. But that's, and my first ever book report was actually on Pooh Pooh and the Dragons, and I made a diorama. I made a lovely clay dragon and used a little action figure for Pooh Pooh and made a lovely diorama to go along with my stirring, like 50-page book report about why this was the best, funniest book ever written. 2nd grade, 8 years old, and that was the first time I had really felt like a book was fun enough that I wanted to read it again instead of just checking it off a list. And it was this bad boy. So if you can find yourself a copy, please find yourself a copy of Pooh Pooh and the Dragons. But those are roughly 15 books to get to know me as a reader. And thank you very much. And I will see you next week, I'm sure.